Let's start this session, please. Before following up our panel and introduction of our panel, I am Teresa Alfaiate, I'm a landscape architect. I would like to thanks to the direction of University of Porto and to the curators of this event, Teresa Novaes and Luís Tavares Pereira, the invitation that was made to me to follow this session and to moderate this session. Thank you. And I'm going to begin to present our guests. I have here in my left side Peter Barber, on the right side the Gonçalo Cantonis and Luís Miguel Ameiras. Peter, thank you to be present today here. It's good to have you, that you could come. Gonçalo Cantonis, Luís Miguel Ameiras, thank you for your presence. I'm going to present the first one. I'm going to present Peter Barber, following his presentation, about 30 minutes. And in sequence, I will present Gonçalo Cantonis and Luís Miguel Ameiras, and we will listen to them, following a small discussion in between us, and of course, opening this discussion to our assembly, all the participating in this session. So, beginning by Peter. Peter is an architect. He is based in London. He begins to work professionally with Richard Rogers and Will Alsop, Jessica Wiles, and he founded his own studio, Peter Barber Architects, in 1989. He is currently a lecturer and reader in architecture at the University of Westminster. He is lecturing under his professional practice at several institutions, and in particular other universities, both in national and international universities, like the Institute of British Architects or the Architectural League of New York. Peter Barber has received several architecture awards in the UK for his residential and mixed-use and urban planning projects, distinguishing himself through his conceptual contributions and a larger number of housing projects, especially social housing. He has been twice shortlisted for Aga Khan Awards, and in 2001 he was recognized for a landmark project of his work, the Donnysbrook Quarters Urban Quarter, which won the first Innovations in Housing Competition Award for the Architecture Foundation, the Housing Design Award from the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, the AIA Award, and the Riba Award. The Donnysbrook Urban Quarter was also one of the finalists of the 2006 Starling Prize, and was included in the exhibition of the 15 most important buildings. Subsequently, he had developed a series of innovative projects, not only for the Circle of 33 housing group, which commanded the first social housing project, but also for organizations like such a Mangos Community Housing Association, the East Thames Housing Group, and the London's boroughs of Newham, Enfield, Greenwich, Camden, and Barking. And I thought it was interesting to underline this. In fact, the main of these commissioners are, of Peter Barber are in fact local authorities and or association groups. These works were awarded in different times. I'm not going to make this long list. Anyway, I would like to underline the year of 2021, when he received 7 awards for projects of housing, social housing, both from the Reba New Brown Award for Housing, 2 Reba Awards for National London Awards, and 2 Reba London Awards, and the AG 100 Contribution to Profession Award. Peter Barber continued to be distinguished in different achievements. He was distinguished by the Order of British Europe for Empire for the service to architecture, and it was recently distinguished by the Royal Academy of Arts in 2022 as member of the restricted number of Royal Academicians. Peter Barber, thank you. We'd like to listen to you under the title Street, isn't it? Who Wants the City?
Thank you.
Si.
Right, I hope I can work out how to do this. That's good. Actually, that's not the first slide. There it is. Well, that made me sound very important, didn't it? But I'm not. But I am a hard-working architect, and I work in difficult circumstances, much as we all do. And this first slide is a reminder of the mess that we are in London at the moment. It's obviously a demonstration that we went on a couple of years ago against the most recent in a succession of disastrous legislation by British governments of both Conservative and Labour, which have made the housing situation in our country go from worse to worse. I'm going to talk some about showing some of our projects, but before I do that, I'd like to talk about the context in which we're working, and I'd also like to talk about some of the things that we think are important when it comes to designing housing. So this is very much the context. In our country, social housing is being torn down. We, in the aftermath of the Second World War, were building 150,000 public housing homes each year, so that by 1977, nearly half the people in our country lived in social housing, enjoyed the benefits of living cheaply in public housing. That figure is now 15%, with the consequence that we now in London, one of the richest cities the world has ever seen, have 7,000 street homeless people living on the pavement, and another 30,000 people living in inadequate or poor accommodation. And that's because housing in the UK, and as it has for much of the world, has become a commodity. Something that you buy and sell, something that pension funds invest in, something that global capital invests in, and rather than seeing it as basic infrastructure. And the outcome of that is this. This is a man living in a subway a few hundred yards from Buckingham Palace. And this is somebody's bedroom on a pavement. But this is somebody else's bedroom. This is a one-bedroom apartment in London which costs £10 million. And so this is a question of inequality, and these are choices that we as a society make about the priorities that we have. There is no reason why we should be having homeless people in our country. And I think 3 things need to happen in order to stop that from happening. Another massive issue in our country, somebody else mentioned it earlier, is empty homes. And there are 300,000 empty homes in England at the moment, many of them in depressed areas in the north of our country away from London, where there is no work. They've become depopulated, and this is the outcome, really lovely little houses which are abandoned, and whole streets of them sometimes. So it's a real mess. 3 things need to happen in the UK. I don't know about the situation in Portugal, but 3 things need to happen in the UK, and if they did, we would end the homelessness problem overnight. One is that we need to have a massive social housing program of the scale that we had, as I say, after the Second World War, when we were building 150,000 public houses each year, and that's what needs to happen. We need to end the right to buy, which is a Thatcherite policy brought in 1977 by Margaret Thatcher, in which people were enabled to buy their own council house, their own public home. They could buy it at a discount, and that's one of the big things that's diminished the amount of social housing available in our country. And then the third thing that I think needs to happen is that we need to have rent controls, rent caps. So that's the very difficult situation in which we find ourselves in the UK, and I think it's a situation repeated over and over again throughout across the globe. And I really do believe that the answer is the construction of social housing, publicly owned, funded housing. This brings me to a section of the talk which talks more about sort of things that are more normally considered to be architectural. And this is a picture of the city of Naples, and it's a reminder for me to give you a quote, because one of my great heroes is Walter Benjamin, and his book, One Way Street, written in the late 1920s, has at the head of each chapter a different European city. And the city that captures my imagination in his description is the city of Naples, because he's talking about an architecture which is about people, which is nothing without people, an architecture which is overlaid with the activity and the color and the industry of people, much as this photograph describes. So for me, architecture is nothing until it has life breathed into it by people moving in and taking it over, an architecture which invites occupation, an architecture which is kind of which you can kind of infiltrate and take over. So when I'm confronted by a sheet of paper and trying to design a project, I instantly start to think about the sort of possibilities in terms of people, what they might be doing in those spaces, those streets, those squares, those roof terraces, those gateways and doorways that we are creating. Anyway, and in a way we make our architecture, we design our cities, but then they come back and they impact on us, they liberate us, or they constrain us. And Walter Benjamin says this, he puts it better than I do. And he's describing this scene here. The passion for improvisation demands that space and opportunity be at any price preserved. Buildings are used as a popular stage. They are all divided into innumerable, simultaneously animated theatres. Balcony, courtyard, window, gateway, staircase, roof are at the same time stages and boxes. So he's describing a sort of theatrical scene in which we as city dwellers are both actors, but we're also an audience. We also observe what's going on. As porous as the stone is the architecture. Buildings and action interpenetrate in the courtyards, arcades and stairways. In everything they preserve the scope to become a theatre of new unforeseen constellations. The stamp of the definitive is avoided. No situation appears intended forever. So it's this kind of animated scene, an architecture kind of animated and activated by people's behavior and their lives. This is a picture which is a reminder again for me to talk about the street. I mean, I hardly need to say it in this beautiful city of Porto, but for me, the street is the basic building block of the city. But it wasn't always the attitude of architects in the modern, the interwar modern period. But for me, I can think of no urban environment which works well if it isn't really organized along streets. This is the street in Brighton in the south of England. And it's a space, a public space is wonderful, isn't it? It belongs to everybody and it belongs to nobody. These are spaces which bring all sorts of people together, rich people, poor people, old people, young people, people from different racial groups. And so it's a wonderful place to mix and meet and get together. And if our intention as architects and as a society is to have a better integrated society, one which people from all sorts of different backgrounds are evident to one another and perhaps even close to one another, then I think the way that we organize our cities as streets is a really good way of contributing to that. I mean, most of our stuff is housing, but it's mostly urban housing. And there's another statistic which I think is helpful in this regard. In London, and it may be the same true here, 70% of all of the buildings in London are houses or housing. So when we design our housing, and we are actually designing pieces of city, and it's the housing that brings us into close proximity with one another. You know, if you imagine a street, housing down either side of the street is pushing people together into a limited and constrained space and bringing them close together. If you imagine a square which has got housing around it. Again, it's concentrating the social activity of the city into a smaller space and bringing people together. This is one of my favorite urban spaces in the world. It's Marrakesh, the square at the edge of Marrakesh, and it absolutely exemplifies what I mean by the public space of the city. For the last 1,000 years, in the cool of the evening, each evening, the little alleyways of Marrakesh disgorge into this incredible space and an incredible sort of theatrical scene, sometimes literally little sort of theatre groups, sometimes singers, snake charmers, storytellers move in, and little pieces of temporary architecture in the form of stages or temporary kitchens come out into this space. And it's a beautiful sort of informal scene. And it's an idea about public space which is reinforced by the name of this space, because in Arabic it's called Jama al-Fanar, and that means a mosque of nothing. And I love the idea of public space being a mosque of nothing, space in which people can behave relatively openly and easily and kind of ungoverned by, clearly there are conventions, but relatively ungoverned by convention. And this reading of public space and of this space is reinforced by the fact that behind the photographer in this picture, of this ever-changing, beautiful kind of informal scene, is the Grand Mosque of Marrakesh, with walls this thick, which has been unchanged and exemplifying an unchanged ideology for the same 1,000 years. So they have the public building and its public space have their counterpoints and their tremendous differences. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit about our practice. We have a shop a shop front on a street, and we're very analog. We make models all the time, and this is kind of I hardly need to say this in the context of this school, where physical models are obviously a really big part of the process. And we work with cardboard models and with foam models, and it's a very sort of tactile, the design process is a very tactile process. We don't really use computers in the early stages of our design work. That's our roof terrace where we have lunch. We're a very small office, there's only 8 of us. We've just been described as more like a dinner party than an architecture office, because it's a very sociable office, and we go to the pub and we have lunch and dinner in spaces like that in our roof terrace. That's us. And we work with hand sketches rather than computer sketches. We think it's a much more dynamic way of exploring form, and so working on transparent paper, we build up our schemes like this. And this as one of the urban designs that we've worked on in the East End of London. Again, a foam model, a design model, not really a presentation model, but ones we can hack bits off with a scalpel in, as I say, a very sort of tactile method. Larger scale models and individual unit models, so we can go through the different scales as we explore the architecture that we're trying to create. So this brings me to the first of the built projects. I'm going to show you some built ones, but also some more theoretical and sketched ones. And this is a project called Donnybrook, and it's in the East End of London. It's the kind of white pieces of building in the middle. It was a housing scheme, but we won a major competition by, when you do a competition, you have to do a board, don't you, or used to before it's computers. And it's good to have something that catches the eye. We said, this scheme is a celebration of the public social life of the street. It said nothing about housing. It was about this street. And I think our proposal was distinguished from many of the others by the fact that it has a new street going through it that way, and a new street going through that way, and at the intersection of those two streets is a new public space. Most of the schemes had a fence around them, and they were an object building. So I think it really appealed to the judges. There's an early axonometric drawing of it. It's an unusual scheme. It owes a lot to Porto and to Alvaro Siza. He was a big hero of mine when I did this. It's probably 20 years ago now. And these are peculiar units, and I'll have to walk over here to do it. So each of those doors, the blue ones, leads straight into a home, and each of the gates leads upstairs to another home. So it's one flat on top of another, which is actually an old-fashioned type from London. So it's kind of terraced housing, but it combines the terraced housing with courtyard housing. And it's housing that gives straight onto the street. This is actually me sitting outside of my own house. And the marvelous things that can happen if you have a house which is right on the street, so that you start to take control of the pavement. I think Walter Benjamin would have approved of what I've done here, because I've made it my own and the street becomes a part of my home. And again, as I say, we use historic precedents a great deal in our work. This is an example of a historic version of this house type, where one door leads into a ground floor home and the other door leads into the first floor home. So they're flats, but they kind of look like terraced houses. And a lot of our work uses roof terraces, and that's fairly unusual in England, but this is a historic example that I found, which we were able to use to convince our client that roof terraces were going to be a good idea rather than the more conventional garden that you have in houses in England. And as I say, Caesar played a big role early on, both in terms of the aesthetic, but also in his use of quite traditional house types. Here we are in Evora with the courtyard house, and here we are closer to home with terraced housing. And so, these are both quite conventional and old-fashioned types of housing, which Caesar in his way, and then us later on, have found a more contemporary expression of. And so they went ahead and built that, which took us by surprise. I was quite young and inexperienced, and it was quite magic when it actually was built. So there's a lot of repetition in the project, but there are also special corners where something, rather special happens. And I suppose to that extent, there's an interest in the picturesque or the filmic way of thinking about architecture. As we move around the city, views open up, and particular emphasis can be laid on the architecture. These are the back gardens of the ground floor units. One of the explanations for this peculiar type that we've created is that in London we have very strict rules about overlooking distances. So if you have a terrace of houses there and a terrace of houses there, the backs of those houses have to be a long way away from the terrace of houses opposite in order for people's privacy to be protected. How this works is that all the ground floor units are separated by a wall, which gives people privacy, and all the upper units are rotated through 90 degrees, so they all look into their own private first floor courtyard. And so it overcomes the rather paranoid overlooking distances rules that we have in our city. And again, it's lovely to see people moving in and taking control of those courtyards. Doesn't always happen, but it's great when it does. I mean, a kind of peculiar story. We had the idea of putting windows in each person's door, so that they could see people when they came and knocked on the door. But of course, nobody wants to be seen when they answer the door. That's why we have these little eye hole things. So what's happened on the project is that every single door, on every occasion that I've been there, has had a little picture in the window. And so an unintended sort of lucky thing has happened. So we always put doors in our windows in our doors now, so because it's a lovely thing. And again, the idea of people making the architecture their own is, so the top right-hand picture is the architect's house. So this is the next project I'm about to show is, and again, I'm showing a historic precedent. So we spend a lot of time going around and taking photographs of bits of city that we admire, that we feel we can learn from. And this is one. And the interesting thing about these houses is they have no gardens at the back. So they invest all of their attention and their love into the space at the front of their house, which is a space that they share with their neighbors. And I thought this was an interesting way of thinking about housing. And others have talked about the sort of shared space of the street. And this is a lovely example in South London. So I decided to try to export that idea into a more contemporary project. And this is social housing in the East End of London. And I'm going to go over there to explain it. So there's a central courtyard, but it also makes a street corner. And there are houses that face directly out onto the street. looking that way and some looking that way, but no back. Oh, that's handy. Okay. So there's one terrace of houses there looking out onto the street, and another terrace of houses looking into the square. So they don't have, and in England we call that back-to-back housing. And so there it is again. So that's a row of houses there, and that's another row of houses facing into the square. So each house is 4 stories high. It really is a house, it's not a flat. You have a front door into a kitchen, a bedroom, and then a living room on the top floor. And as I say, rather than having a back garden, you have a little roof terrace in these notches. And as I say, this is a traditional form of housing, most of which has been demolished because it was considered to be slum housing. But they've saved a few in the city of Birmingham in the north of England, where there were 30,000 houses like that. And I was worried about proposing this sort of housing, given the reputation that it has. So I went to visit this place, and I thought it was really lovely. And these houses back in the day had very, very poor sanitation and poorly maintained. But had they been properly maintained and given their own bathrooms and so on, I think they would have been fantastic. And it's very sad that they were just swept away with the bulldozer. And in fact, I was shown around these houses by some people about my age who'd grown up in houses like this in the 1960s. Their houses were, as I say, they were knocked down because they were considered to be slum housing. And the people were moved out into tower blocks on the edge of town, and their whole social world was destroyed. So a sad story, really. But so we kind of revisited this, and as I say, there's a row of houses, there's another row of houses, and there's the central courtyard. And again, miracle of miracles, it got built. We had a wonderful client in the form of a local borough, a public body in the East End of London, and this is for people who need social housing, so it's inexpensive housing. So a kitchen, bedroom, and then a living room on the top floor with a roof terrace. And that's the way through into the central courtyard. There's the kitchen. So it's really just one room per floor. It wouldn't suit everybody, and I think people try to generalize about housing. Housing should be this, or housing should be that. I think for some people, to live in a house on the edge of a street and knowing one's neighbors is their ideal environment. For other people who prefer more privacy, that would be difficult, and they'd rather be high up, maybe even in isolation at the end of the day, going to their flat at the top of a tower block and being on their own with a lovely view of the city and actually not interacting with their neighbors. So I think a variety of different sorts of housing is needed. And we have very stringent rules about how housing should be organized in London, and it's a real problem because it imagines that we're all the same, and I think different temperaments, different physical abilities require different kinds of housing. So that's the top floor with the courtyard, if you want to be on your own and private. And again, it's lovely to see people move in and the trees to get bigger, and people take control of these spaces at the front of the houses, which we intend and hope will be like, you get in the southern states of America, the stoop or porch at the front of a house where people kind of sit out, and again it blurs the division between the interior of the house and the external space of the street. So we're now next to a very, very busy road. One day somebody's going to give us a lovely site next to a river or something, but we generally get a railway line or some unloved strip of land next to a road. And this is called the North Circular Road, and it's a 6-lane motorway. And our intention was to build a large 4 or 5-story high building along the motorway and to create a quiet little little street behind it, protected from the noise of all the cars over here. And then a second little, very slender rind of buildings which make the other side of the street. It felt important to us that a street has 2 sides to it. So there's the sketch. And again, they built it. So this space, a bit like you were talking about your decks, it becomes a space which is shared by everybody who lives in these homes. and people have already started to use it in that way, you know, playing football out there and kids hanging out and people putting chairs out, which is, you know, really lovely thing that is starting to happen. And there's the less kind of nice side of the project, but still this very sort of heroic kind of, presents this very sort of heroic front to the main road, but then this much more domestic kind of environment tucked in behind. So each one of the buildings on the right is a little apartment building with 4 or 5 flats off a stair that you walk up in each case. And these are more like houses or double-stack maisonettes, a bit like Donnybrook. And so that is somebody in their flat overlooking the main road. The important thing about that building is that, yes, they look over the main road, but because it's a very thin building, they all have a view and openable windows out onto the very quiet mews behind. So I think this is the last of the built projects. How are we doing? Not too bad. Last of the built projects. This is a homeless hostel in North London, so for people who have been living on the street. And it's an old building, which that's the old building there fronting the street. And we have other buildings out of the back. So we decided to retain the building at the front, but that this single-story building at the back should go. And one of the problems with homeless hostels is that they usually are organized around spaces like this. You know, so you're talking about some of the most vulnerable people in society, many of them with mental health problems, many with drug or alcohol problems, many who've been living in a cardboard box on the street, many who have been kicked out of either their social housing or their family home for one reason or another, and this is where they end up. So we thought it'd be interesting to imagine a different kind of hostel, one in which there was an open space rather than a dark, dingy, horrible corridor. And so we encouraged our client to think, who again was a local borough, so this is again a public building, to maintain the existing building onto the street, but to build a building which wrapped around a garden, with each person having a little, rather than a room off a corridor, having the tiniest little house. We made a really expansive and welcoming entrance hall, which is very unusual for buildings like this. And as I say, we designed this space where we imagined people who would otherwise perhaps be sitting in a darkened room freaking out, coming out and working with a gardener to create a beautiful space like this. And when I went to see Camden Council, who are the clients for this project, I read them a little paragraph, which I'm going to read to you. We imagine a group of residents working with a gardener to create and maintain an intensely planted and beautiful garden with an apple tree or two, potatoes, green veg, soft fruit, herbs, a greenhouse, a potting shed, and a sunny spot to sit and rest. We think there ought to be a little room or shed in the garden for private chats and counselling. Conceived as the social heart of the hostel, the garden creates a homely, domestic atmosphere. It gives participating residents an interest and an outlet for their energy, helping to foster a sense of belonging, self-worth, and empowerment. So that was it during COVID, and slowly, the gardening project, which is a formal part of the treatment of these people in the hostel, is coming into being. And so somebody is employed called a horticulturalist and a therapist who comes in and invites people out into the courtyard and works with them. This is another hostel we've done where the garden's on a smaller scale, but again, this forms a really important part of the treatment of these quite often troubled and disturbed people coming out and working in the garden. That's one of those tiny houses. So you walk into a little tiny studio space with a kitchen, shower room under there, and up onto a little bedroom platform there. So I'm going to close with some images of some more sort of theoretical projects. I always keep a sketchbook, and trying to keep my mind alive when I'm in the world of trying to make buildings in the here and now, trying to imagine a better world, a more ecological world, a more equal world. I find myself sketching these, making these little sketches of other types of settlement. Some of them made out of mud, some of them made out of hemp, some out of stone, some carved into the ground. And just, the sketchbook is a wonderful place, and you know, particularly to the students amongst you, I would really encourage you to make the sketchbook a really important part of your education. And I do it to this day, and as I say, it's how I keep my mind alive in the context of, you know, the very trying at times, you know, experience of making buildings in the crazy sort of economic and cultural environment which we enjoy in the here and now. So I try and do one of these a day. It doesn't always work out. Try and design a city a day. Sometimes they turn into models. This was an island. Actually, the white is the water. It's in the Thames estuary, and the idea that these buildings might be made out of sort of gravel and stuff that's dredged out of the bottom of the river. And the idea of a little village made out of mud in south of England. And I'm going to leave you with some images of one of the projects, which, as I say, usually take a day. This one took a bit more of a hold, and it became known as 100-mile City. And it's a project. It's an idea about if we need millions of homes in London, rather than knocking down bits of the middle of London, and rather than allowing suburban sprawl to go out into the green belt which surrounds our city, what about a really intense city? You know, like a little piece of Siena or Porto, in a 100-mile strip which wraps all the way around the edge of London. So in the background there you've got countryside, and in the foreground you've got suburbia, little two-story cottages of suburbia. So anyway, I said this. So imagine this, so the circumference of London is 100 miles long, and imagine this city wrapping around London. It's a crazy idea, but you know. Well, it's a provocation. It makes people think, doesn't it? That's what one tries to do with this sort of thing. Build a street-based linear city 100 miles long, 100 meters wide, and 4 stories high. Wrap it round London. Give it little factories, schools, houses, and shops, laid out in terraces along intimately scaled streets and around squares. Make it a dense, intense edge to London, a confident, purposeful boundary, fronting a revitalized, productive countryside. Much of the countryside around London isn't doing much, but we could be using it more productively for our food. The 100-mile city is a linear Barceloneta, a circular Rome, a stretched Porto, suburbia reprogrammed, hybridized, compressed. Ride the 100-mile high-speed orbital monorail. So in that thing there is a monorail which would go right round London. London has fantastic transport into and out of suburbia in a sort of radial. But to get from one part of suburbia to another, you have to go back into London. So the idea is that our monorail would connect the ends of all of these the end sort of stations, and you'd be able to move around suburbia more easily. Ride the 100-mile high-speed orbital monorail, a souped-up circle line where the loose ends and frayed edges of London's transport system, its isolated city edge train and bus termini, are instantly, meaningfully, usefully connected with circus ride technology. Bexley to Brentford in 40 minutes, super functional, super fast, and super fun. And over time, watch our city grow inwards. So rather than sprawling outwards into the countryside, it might sprawl back in and start eating up suburbia. And over time, watch our city grow inwards, spreading like wildfire through wasteful, antisocial, car-choked suburbia, eastwards from Richmond, west across the Newham marshes, up from Eltham, across the hills of Greenwich and the empty golf courses of Enfield. Metroland backfilled, integrated, urbanized, London for 40 million people, a kind of inside-out plan voisin, ville radieuse Blighty style. That's it.
Thank you, Peter Barber. So I'm going to present now our other two guests. Gonçalo Canto Muniz, he's an architect. He was completed his PhD in 2011 and published his thesis with the name of O Ensino Moderno da Arquitetura, a formação do arquiteto nas escolas de belas artes em Portugal entre 1931 e 1969 by Afrontamento 2019. He's a researcher in the Center of Social Studies in the University of Coimbra, where he co-coordinates the thematic urban culture, sociabilities and participation. Within this research center, he coordinates some European urbanat project, healthy corridors as drivers of social housing, neighborhoods, and the co-creation of social, environmental, and marketable nature-based solution with other 28 international partners supported by Horizon 2020 program. And he has researched and published on urban regeneration and modern architecture, particularly in school facilities and the teaching of architecture. And José Miguel Lameiras, I think he's right, okay, is landscape architect and assistant professor at the Faculty of Science of University of Porto. He is a researcher at Biopolis. He carries out projects, research, and professional practice in the field of urban regeneration involving the green structure design, and it is particularly interested in the application of digital technologies. At Biopolis, he is the responsible for the Horizon 2020 Urbanat project funded by the European Commission and the coordinator of the urban regeneration project of Parque de Alameda de Cartes in Porto. He has been involved in other projects in Porto and makes part of the team of the Australia University Campus Park, and he is beginning his professional academic career where he collaborates with the GHB studio in Denmark and lectured and carried out some research at the University of Copenhagen. Please go on with your presentation.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start thanking to Teresa Novaes and Luís Tavares Pereira for organizing all these events and all this interaction with all the schools. Also send regards to the director of the Faculty of Architecture, João Pedro Xavier. And today I'm going to present the project that we have been involved for the last 5 years. So it's a research in action project, it's not a professional practice. And today I'm going to do the presentation with my colleague José Miguel Lameiras. José Miguel is a landscape architect, and we thought that it would be interesting to do this together, so that in this program we have also landscape architecture schools, and we could in fact do it with the sociology colleagues or with the economics or the designers. So it's a project that involves many other disciplines. It's an interdisciplinary project that has the interesting thing of doing research, but also we go to action, let's say. It's a research in action, and we build the research that we develop. So now, then José Miguel will explore a little bit the case of Porto that is now under construction. But we in fact start with the thematic of this event, the modern houses, with the SAL process that we approach a lot in the first seminar, and I would like to go back to it with 2 key messages related to the way we design, not only for the people, but with the people. And this is one of the key messages of this SALP process that has in its guidelines the idea that the people that will inhabit the houses, they are from the beginning in the process. They don't arrive in the end to open the door and use the house, but they are from the first moment. And this is an important shift in the way we were doing houses in Portugal and all over the world in the 70s when the SALP process was, when the SALP process started. The other message is the idea that the architects need to improve the way they design in order to be in permanent contact with these people, the people that will use the houses, but also the people that manage all the process. So how we developed our profession in close interaction with the people that will use the houses, but also with the ones that will work with us as the landscaper, the sociologist, and the others that are part of this interdisciplinary team. So this social role of the architect that in the 70s was very present and today is again on the top of the table. And this is something that this book that I like very much, Participation and Architecture, also calls our attention for the way that the participation changes the way people think, but also it needs to change the way we do our architectural practice. So what are the methodologies, what are the tools, how we design? And this idea is of course, very important in housing projects, but also when we deal with the public space. So we are more focused today, and this project is focused on the public space, not on the houses itself. This is why we bring this idea of working between houses. And I like very much this idea of an open system that Richard Sennett talks about, the public space as an open system to include the ones that use the public space. So how we involve all the dynamics that happen in the public space, as we have been talking a lot today. One guideline that we like to go through is these When Habitat books. They develop a lot of projects, especially out of Europe, with other realities, and they produce these international guidelines where they made available several methodologies and tools in order to rethink the way we develop the public space. So this idea that the public space needs, our cities need to be more compact, socially inclusive, more integrated and connected cities. And this is interesting to follow the work that When Habitat has been doing. In fact, in this project, it's a call that we participate. We applied for a Horizon 2020 call that was focused on sustainable and smart cities, but also on nature-based solutions. So we tried to understand, of course, some of us had already experienced. We are 28 partners from all over Europe, so we are more or less 100 people working in this project, and nature-based solutions was one of the key issues of this project. So we need to deal and integrate in the urban regeneration process some of these solutions that are framed by these reports. But we want to also to critically work with these reports. So we are developing also other ways of thinking nature-based solutions, especially introducing the human side of nature, let's say. So the project is framed by these 6 topics, so being in innovation action, smart and sustainable cities, inclusive urban regeneration, that is probably the topic that we are most interested. Also, we need to work in deprived urban areas, working with nature-based solutions, and we need to involve 7 cities, which becomes, with this project became a little bit crazy to work with 7 cities on the same time. So these 4 dimensions were very important for us to understand that we are working together with several disciplines. We are also working with different sectors of the society. So we have as partners academics, academia, municipalities, companies, the third sector, and of course we have the citizens as main players in this project. But we have also different cultures, and this is very important when we are working in a project where we have to involve the local communities to think that there are cultural backgrounds and cultural ways of cultural lens, let's say, to the problems that we are addressing from the north of Europe to the south, to the east or to the west, but also in the cities where working in the center or working in the periphery is completely different. And the intersectionality issues, because while we evolve the citizens, we need to involve them, taking into consideration issues of gender, of age, race, and their specificities. So we developed this framework, this kind of diagram to understand ourselves among these 28 partners and think about how we are going to develop this inclusive urban regeneration process. So I will talk mainly about these diagrams that we developed with all our partners in order to create a baseline for our project. And this idea that the urban regeneration projects, they need to improve by bringing people together to the urban planning, to the traditional urban planning. So the idea of developing a co-creation methodology became something very important for us, trying to, for one side, see what is the community that is interested in participating and how we create interactions between communities, so this idea of a COP, a community of practice, but also the co-creation process as a methodology to be followed in the different cities by different participatory methods. So this is the map of the partners that are involved in the project, mainly in Europe, partners that are financed among the 7 cities. So each city has always an academic partner that in most cases is an architecture school, but in some other cases is an environmental school. And the municipality, which is very challenging to work with the municipality to develop something experimental, or that we aim to be experimental. And we have some transversal partners, as my research center, SEJ, that works transversally with all the partners. And we thought that it would be interesting to have also partners outside of Europe, so that our Eurocentric view could be criticized by other colleagues from other regions. So in the case of Porto, that José Miguel will go a little bit more through it, we have the Porto municipality, Domus Social, that is the institution responsible for social housing. We have CBIO, now Biopolis, SEJ from Coimbra, the University of Coimbra. We have here Luís Miguel Correia, that is also working the project with us, developing several issues together, and we have a design, participatory design team, Guda, that is also part of this team. So we decided to put our effort not in the city center, but in these deprived areas that the European Commission asked us for, and we thought that it would be interesting to approach areas that are relatively homogeneous, because every city is a city, every neighborhood is a neighborhood, but we could find some common issues among these peripheral social housing neighborhoods built in the mid-sized cities in Europe. So in Porto, it's Campanhã that we see here, for instance, Nantes, Nantes Norte, Sofia, Nadezhda, and we have all these neighborhoods produced during the 50s, 60s, according to the modern structure, this image is very interesting because it shows how these neighborhoods were implemented in agricultural areas where there was no basic infrastructure. And still today, these critic issues that were created by the decision of building social housing out of the city, still today there are issues to solve in all the cities, especially in this idea of creating connections, something that we'll try to explore in our project. So these are the other cities involved. So we have pilot cities and these follower cities that are developing the urban plans in the second moment, trying to learn especially with the mistakes that we do. And it's very interesting because there are cities that have, for instance, this heritage background as Siena or Nova Gorica, that is a border city with Gorizia in Italy, from Slovenia to Gorizia, to Italy, that will allow us to approach these concepts in a different way. So one of the key concepts that is also in our title, this idea of the healthy corridor. So we would like to go beyond the idea of the green corridors that most of the cities are implementing, and we would like to think about what could be something that could involve the communities in these green infrastructures that, of course, they are needed in the idea of the renaturalization of the cities, but how the community could bring another layer related to the use of these green areas. So this idea will become very important because we develop not only territorial solutions that will be built, but also immaterial solutions where the communities are especially involved, creating dynamics in the public space. So the catalog of nature-based solutions was improved by these territorial nature-based solutions that are, let's say, that are the most traditional ones. Here is a wild garden, one of the solutions that is mostly used in these areas. But also we developed the technological ones by our partner from the Catalonia, the Institute of Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, that developed these very nice prototypes that are being built in the cities, and also the social and solidarity economy and the participatory solutions in the way to highlight that we need to develop solutions with the people and not only for the people. So one of the key concepts here that became very important was the idea of the living lab. The idea that the research is not in the universities, not only here in the schools, but it's mostly there with the local communities. So we try to implement in each of the neighborhoods that we are working a laboratory, a living laboratory, that is activated by the local partners, mostly associations, but some citizens that are involved with, and bringing together also the municipality, the departments of the municipality that are working closely with these communities, and other companies, for instance, or associations or other academic partners that can help us to activate these living labs. And this is very important because these 5-year projects, one day they end, and this project will end in March next year. And suddenly all this dynamic disappears. And it's very important that these labs continue and they still work, and they continue working, pushing for the solutions according to their needs. So we developed also this co-creation process that establish all the steps, all the stages, but also all the activities and tools that could be used in each moment. So the idea that going through the design process, we have in the first moment the diagnostic to understand the needs of that area, of course combining with the traditional urban planning analysis that is of course important, but it's the moment where we engage the citizens and we understand the territory according to their way of using it. Then the design process, which is a moment where we need to ideate solutions, but we need also to develop it, and we need to arrive at moments of conflict and consensus between, to validate the proposals, and then the implementation process that is, in some cases, developed by public tenders, but also many things can be done together with the citizens, and then the monitoring process. So I give some examples here of what we have been doing, for instance, for the diagnostic, and this idea of reinventing a little bit the tools that we have. Some come from architecture, others come from other disciplines, but they help us to understand that territory. And that can be done with maps, with photographs, but also walking in the areas and understand directly what are the needs and what are the dreams. Then the ideation process, we work a lot with the children. We believe that children are key players in the rethinking of the city. So schools are in these social housing neighbors partners that are very important to be involved. And of course, we need to understand what are these nature-based solutions that even for us sometimes we want to rethink it. So one thing very important was to translate all these concepts to them, and we did these exhibitions to understand what this means and how we could select things that could be interesting for our city. The ideation process, where models and drawings were very important to do together, to think together what could be the solutions for the needs. And then the implementation process. And here I'd like to call the attention for this stakeholder advisory board. It was the moment that we understood that we need to create a kind of assembly where we could meet every month. So we are working for 5 years, so it's very difficult to keep people involved in such a long process. And also not only the citizens, but also the municipalities. So this stakeholder advisory board has working groups that work every month, and every 3 months we meet with the chancellors and the mayors of the city, and we take decisions together. So this is very important to really involve the citizens, and they believe in they create trust in the process. And also with the municipality, it's also important that all the players trust in the process. But it's very important that we don't wait for the solutions to be built. So it was in fact the citizens that start to ask us, let's do something, let's do some what we call tactic actions, the experiments to test if what we are doing makes sense. So a lot of experiments putting their ideas in practice happened during these last years, and some of them happen every month. For instance, there is a market that happens every month, and every month we are improving it, the way we organize, the way we design the tables, people meet together. So it's a way of testing what we are designing. But of course, then there is the moment of the public tender where things get more complicated. For instance, in Porto, we had one public tender that failed. And now, finally, things are under construction, and we hope that we finalize everything next year. And then there is an important moment of monitoring. So we need to understand if what we are doing in this, in our activity, in this research, but also in the practice, if what we are doing makes sense. So we create an observatory to collect all the data that is produced in the project, and then we developed quantitative and qualitative tools like surveys to understand how people use the public space, what we call the well-being survey, but also the most important is the social observation, is to be in the field and see how people use, in fact, the space. So this is the phase that we will start soon to understand how people use it. So this is a little bit the map of the people that are involved in all the cities in different groups that show a little bit the complexity of this process. And this is the result, the strategic healthy corridors for each city. We try to design it in the same language to understand and could compare in the sense that we could see how this concept was developed in each one of the cities according to the local cultures and the local needs. This idea of this green structure that aggregates several solutions that come from the citizens. And they take different shapes. For instance, in the case of Porto, it's a structure, it's an infrastructure in between neighborhoods. In other cases, it's a kind of a loop that goes across a circular path across neighborhoods. And in other cases, it's a linear path that activates, as in the case of Sofia, for instance, that activates 4 squares in this Nadezhda neighborhood of Sofia. And the same happens a little bit in Nova Gorica and Siena and Brussels and Denmark. So 2 or 3 examples of these results. For instance, in Nantes, the corridor is almost built. It's a more fragmented space, because there was already in Nantes North another team working in a larger scale. So we are developing activating some spots, and for instance here these places to read from the colleagues from IAC that developed with the community these places to read, or a public space that has a kindergarten in the middle, this Canada Park. In the case of Sofia, it's interesting, they launch a call for students to develop a swimming pool, because there is a thermal tradition in Sofia and they want to build a swimming pool, so they launch a call with the students, and they are developing also beyond the construction of the corridor, this classroom that is a very innovative space that is now being built. In Sofia, I would like also to, in Nova Gorica, I'd like also to bring this very nice landscape approach from our colleagues of the University of Nova Gorica, trying to understand the before and after, and in this case it's interesting because as Nova Gorica was a follower, they will not have the finance to build, the budget to build, but as Nova Gorica is now capital of culture in 2025, they integrate the corridor of Nova Gorica in this cultural capital. And I would like to end with the project that we are developing for one of the spaces that José Miguel will explore, this market that has been developed with the citizens for an old ruin that is in a very bad condition in the area of the corridor. So we are working on converting this ruin into a public space and developing all the market structure with the local community. Finally, saying that this project has also this pedagogical approach, and we developed a summer school where also Teresa Novaes was involved in Coimbra in July, where we put everyone thinking about this project for Coimbra, because Coimbra was not one of the cities. So this is something that we are doing in several cities, activating these workshops. So I'll give now the floor to José Miguel to tell us a little bit about the work in Porto.
I got the lunchtime slot, so I promise that I will be keep time. First and foremost, I'd like to thank, of course, Teresa and Luís for the invitation, but I'd also like to put a big thank you note also to João Pedro and Teresa Calix. This is a place where I have lots of friends in the audience. This is a place where I come quite often, and this is a place where I always feel at home. So thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to show a work that, as you will see, we have a personal connection to. Because more than houses, this is about the public space that connects the houses. More than the public space that connects the houses, what you're going to see is actually a reflection on how public spaces should connect between each other. So it's about the space in between spaces, and that's I believe that the contribution that you'd like to give and the awareness that you'd like to raise in here. Gonçalo just mentioned something that it's quite important that you all understand, which is that this project started with a question: can we regenerate a deprived area of the city using nature-based solutions? But it also has something which is quite a luxury for anyone that's sitting in here, which is time. We had 5 years, which means that we had 18 months to conduct a diagnostic and identify how to do things and where to do things. This is quite new. 1 year for landscape design, 1 year for construction, and then we had, in theory, 18 months for doing something that we never do, which is post-occupancy assessment, which is to go back on site and actually assess if what we have designed actually worked or not, because we learn far more from our mistakes than we learn from our successes. So these are the key things that I'd like you to always have in mind when you see the design. I always like to start with the teams, because it's not possible to work on the public space with the complexity of the public space without having not a large team, but teams of teams. And this is something that I would like to point out, as Gonçalo so well mentioned it. It's very important that we work together, that we work in system, because that will make things better for the end user. And we're all aligned in that. And this was a project where we had teams of teams. We had that also in the Asprella parks, but this was something quite unique, I would say. The most deprived area of Porto, everybody knows it. It's Campanhã, the far east side of Porto, and it's the area that has suffered the most most in the recent years from urban fragmentation. We have the highway, we have the railroad, and we have the newer highway. This area has been so fragmented and excluded from the city that the distance, it's not just physical, it's psychological. Many people of Porto think that this does not belong to Porto, that this area of the city actually belongs to Gondomar, which is the next city. And look, the area where we developed the healthy corridor, it sits in between the three biggest social housing areas. That's why we call it the space in between spaces, because the social housing areas, they have public spaces, but it's important that all of these public spaces connect in a coherent mesh and network. Another thing that was quite unique and never in my professional life I had was the fact that the project area was the consequence of a process and not the starting point. Never I had this in my life. So, and this was very important because through citizen engagement and through local diagnostic, we identified where would be the most suitable place to invest first the EU money and then the municipality money. And this was very important because we never neglect a good crisis, and because we had limited resources, we had to find the most suitable places. And you're going to see a few of the areas that if the process had been reversed, they would never be part of this design. So just for you to understand the impact of these large infrastructures, I call them the 20th century walls. Just for you to understand it, just pay attention to that area. And also pay attention that we decided to act and work on steep slopes that belong to the highway infrastructure company. If we had not proposed this, these would have never included them. Why is it so important? Because if you look at the territory, in 1 kilometer extension, the only pedestrian crossing point is under a viaduct. This is very important. Feel the physical distance. Anticipate the psychological distance. This is emotional. If you spend one day in there, you start getting an understanding of how people use it and how the territory actually shapes the social life of people. And I'm going to reinforce this. The territory shapes the social life of people. And this is one of the clear needs of urban regeneration. Look, because we had money, because we had time, we conducted an assessment on how people move, and we used a human-centric approach. And one of the things that we came to realize is that in this territory, you can actually meet what Paris has been dreaming of. You can have mobilities where you go from your house to your school, to the supermarket, to the metro station, with trajectories that are under 15 minutes. And we actually measured them. We used Jan Gehl's method. We went on site, and we started asking people, where do you come from? Where do you go to? What's your main trajectory? And we overlaid everything. So this was a behavioral mapping that we did, and this gave us an insight, not just on how many people, but most importantly, who are these people? And we saw lots of handicapped people, we saw lots of young parents with children, so it's something that we know that we need to include into the project, and we need to make sure that it's featured into the design. And look, pay close attention to the core central area. You see that there is a huge overlapping of lines in there. This is the area that people used to cross. So if you zoom in that core area that we have identified, this is what you get. And what you get is a territory where people used unpaved paths to move across the territory. And if you just listen to these people, and if you just value something that people are already showing you that they need, then you'd have already granted the success. And this is something quite unique. So one of the most used paths in the territory, it's not consolidated. And how used is it? Someone that lives in Círculo Porto and works in Corujera, and there are many of such people, if they want to go to their workplace using sidewalks, it takes them 16 minutes. They have to go up and down. Of course, nobody does that. Everybody does not the car path, but the pedestrian efficient path. And this is one of the key messages. This takes 8 minutes, and it's faster. And it also has a very important feature, which is that it connects to the 4 main schools of the territory. And because of that, in the morning, at 8 in the morning, we measured 48 people. 8:30, we measured 48 people. Some of these people, because of the economic conditions, they have to do this path 4 times a day because they cannot afford the lunch meals at the school for their kids. So this is the existing conditions that we have. If we just value this, we would have already assured the success of the design. And we expanded this. And this is very important because we cannot just act on that area. If we create mobility conditions, it needs to connect somewhere. So we did this research map. This is the first time that we see a map that was designed according to the way people move and not according to the way cars move. We all have thousands of maps in our hands every day. They're all designed for cars. They're not designed for people. And one of the things that this map reveals is that 25% of the pedestrian network of this territory is made of unpaved paths. So this is a clear demonstrator of the need for urban regeneration. This is a clear demonstrator that we should act on this territory. And it's people that are telling us how to act and where to act. And this gave us the confidence that we could act in there and there would be a continuation. Another of the key components of this landscape design project was that we studied this side, the side of the handicapped persons, the side of the old people that cannot move on the territory. But as designers, we know that we should always go for the extremes. So we also studied the other side, the other extreme, which is the sports activities, because public space has a very important role in providing opportunities for sports. This is the Strava heat map, which means that every time someone runs or cycles, this will start to light up. And this is a map where I draw your attention to because the most important thing in this map, it's not what you see, which is quite obvious. City center, city parks, the new Asprella campus, everything is very lit up. There are lots of people using the public space, but the most important part of this map is what you don't see. And what don't you see? But it gets worse. If you zoom in, you see the new Oriental Park, and the new Oriental Park provided a fantastic connection from north to south, but it does not connect people to the urban matrix. So it's fantastic for people to take their car, they take their bike out of the car, they cycle, they run, they go back to their car, and they go away. And it gets worse. People who come from the city center, they go to Corujera, and then they go back. People who come from the city center, they go to the soccer stadium, and then they go back. They don't penetrate into the territory. So we want to make this evidence-based. And this is an evidence that there is a problem. And what we're aiming at by acting on this area is that in a few years, after the project is developed, that we start seeing more lines forming, that we bring the people from the city and that we take the people to the city. This will be one of our KPIs, one of our key indicators of the success of this project. It's very important to always study the opposites. This is the other extreme. We often go to our sites only by day. And of course, because I had a personal connection to this territory, we went in there by night. And if you look at this map, it reveals one thing. On a territory that suffers from light pollution, and light pollution, urban light pollution, is an issue in all European cities. That's the reason why we cannot see the stars at night. Because of that, because of the soccer stadium, and because of the highway network, and by contrast, you can see that in here, the most used area is not lit, and if you leave a very overly lit area and you get inside an unlit area, what you get is this. So it's a very, very dark area. And as you all know, in Porto, at 4:30, 5:30 in the winter, it gets dark. And that's why the parents use their cell phones to go and take the kids to school at night. So this is what you see, people with cell phones lighting the path. So there are lots and lots and lots of clues in here. We just need to respect these clues and value these clues. This would be one of the most important things that you could do for these people. This is a project with a strong social impact. And the impact is an impact on everyday life. We look at this area and we look at this intervention area as an urban acupuncture solution because it unlocks the most important mobility trajectories in this area. But there is also one key important thing that it's very important to understand, which is that this is an area that's part of everyday mobility of people. This is going to lead to the development of Parque de Almeida de Carros, which is in construction, but it's not the standard park of Porto, where you take your car, you go down Avenida da Boa Vista, you go to the city park, you make a picnic, and you go back by car. This is a space it's a space between spaces. It's a space that people use every day to go to work. It's just like the European cities that we all love to visit. We have the green structure embedded into the core of the city, and this grants quality of life. So we did lots of social engagement, lots of interviews. This allowed us to collect the most important stories. For example, this is also the path of the supermarket. This is the path that people used to take to the supermarket. We found stories of people that carry 2 pairs of shoes because the path is muddy, so they take 1 pair of shoes and then they go to their workplace and they change the pair of shoes. So we collected stories of people that for 3 years their handicapped daughter has not ever come to the public space because there is no way that she could get access to the public space. We had lots of citizen engagement with the associations, a process that was conducted by the Center of Social Studies that involved lots and lots of people, but mainly the stakeholders and the ones who are responsible for the territory. And I would also like to point out one very important thing, which is that we also gathered together with the technicians from the municipality, and this was very important. They know the territory like nobody else. They know that the school of Falcão, if a fire truck needs to go in there, only half of it is accessible for the fire truck. So we need to incorporate that into our design. They know that people who work in the vegetable gardens, they cannot take soil to the vegetable gardens because there is no access. So these stories were fundamental, and these are some of the stories that we collected. And to give you a grasp on the area that was selected, I'm going to just point out to a few areas, like these ones, because of the connection, an entry plaza next to the school that we're going to speak of. And look, this alternates between this area with the excess of plants, which are exotic invasive species that are causing an ecological problem, and an overly exposed area. So this is the canvas that you had to work on, and the canvas that reveals the scars of the territory. A canvas whose main path can reach in certain areas 30% slope, and where we have people that fell in there and they broke their hip. For a person that is over 80 years old and breaks their hip, their expected lifetime is 1 year. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's the worst thing that can happen to an elderly people. And that's why it's so important that we address these questions. And we also had landfills, leftovers from the urban development constructions that were just left in there, that are creating a huge visual blockage. And if you're not seen, and if you don't see, you don't feel safe. So we know that we need to increase the perception of safety. 60 minutes, sim. 5 minutes. So this is the landscape design. Each of these paths is a consequence of a diagnostic. Each of these solutions embeds everything that we have collected, both from a specialist work of view, but also from a participatory point of view. We address the scars of the territory, the topography, and we also addressed it from an ecological perspective and a planting design perspective. It's very important that we are aware of this, which is that trees are like humans. They like to be planted in clusters. The systemic effect of planting trees in clusters, from an ecological and aesthetic point of view, it's much bigger than planting the same number of trees individually, but much bigger. And this also allows for visual accesses to be preserved. And all of this planting was also done according to the evidence, to the thermal behavior that we made. We did drone mapping to address and to see and to try to realize how the territory behaves thermically. And we could realize that in the same day, in the summer, we had a peak of 42 degrees in here, while at the same time we had 25 degrees in here. So planting design was made according to the climatic conditions, and we selected both deciduous and evergreen species to make sure that in the winter the sun radiation could come and reach the pavements. You're going to see that everything was made in VR because landscape designers tend to like to see the world as if it was going to be seen and lived from above. We're not birds. We use and we leave the space at eye level. We walk in the eye level. So the fact that we had a tool that always placed us at eye level was key, was fundamental, because it granted us with the humility to understand that sometimes our design was wrong and we had to change and revise the design. And next, it's one of the most important images for me, which is landscape designers tend to deceive people. We overpromise to people. We always promise people the idea and the image of beautiful big trees. that will only happen in 20 years. But we have made this now in the way that we have added fast-growing plants, which are going to dominate the landscape in the first 5 to 10 years. They're in there to create the conditions to the slow-growing carbon fixators. So these plants will need to be removed. Yes, you have a landscape architect in front of you saying that we're planting trees to remove them, because that's how the ecosystem works. So we're going to plant them so they can create shade in the first years. They can dominate the landscape, but they're in there to create the conditions for the oak trees, the climatic trees for the Portuguese context. And this is the site of the ruin that Gonçalo was also introducing. And it's very important, just as a side note, on something that we always implement and introduce in our landscape design projects, which is that 100% of the water that falls on site is managed on site. All architects, all landscape architects, all urban designers will have to face this important challenge. Whenever you're developing, in some countries, you need to put the water into the ground. We first did that in the parks of Asprela. We tested it in there. We designed things so that once every 20 years, once every 30 years, the system would work and the water would be retained and infiltrated in the park, and the water would not damage the city. We have Rui Ramos in here, to whom we own a lot, because it's thanks to him and Professor António Cardoso that Asprela Parks exists and that you have these solutions that you can visit and that have been tested and stress tested again and again and again. Because the heavy rainfall that you're expected to have every 20 years in the Asprela parks, we had 3 in the last 2 years. So the calculations are wrong, and we need to design and to be extremely good in using the public space, the permeable space, to put the water into the ground, to recharge the aquifers, so we don't damage the ecology of the site. So this is something very important, because Alameda de Carlos Park is very steep. We're going to mimic the solutions that have been designed and tested for the London Olympic Park, and we're going to implement there. And I finish, I know that you're probably hungry, I finish just with this, with a part of the project that touches me the most. This is the school of Falcão. Many times I have walked in this street and I never saw the school. But if I had gone in there at 8:30, and we've been there at 8:30 recently, then the children would occupy the street. And if you know, in Barcelona, since 2018, if you have a school, it's mandatory by law that you need to have a plaza. If you don't have a plaza, let's demolish the building to make the plaza. Because the plaza, it's a safety point to put the children, and it's a social space for the parents to interact and to get to know each other. So, and this is the area that we propose to the municipality that should be included. This used to be an island, someone already mentioned an island, with 15 houses in here, very, very, very compact, and it was a challenge, and we designed it in the way to create this social area, and the entrance of the school is going to be lateralized, so we have a flat social area, a flat active area, and then we have these slopes to make the transitions. So this is a very important social infrastructure that came as a consequence of a diagnostic, and this is one of the key images that I'd like to show. And I finish just with just a view of what we call the healthy corridor in Porto, and just so you can grasp a little bit of what's here. And construction is happening. Sorry, I actually forgot that we had this. And with this, I finish saying that this is a small contribution that we want to give to the social, ecological, aesthetic, economic life of Porto. But this is something that I believe that fits very well the framework of more than houses, which is the space between spaces. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can now initiate a bit the discussion of these 2 presentations with regard to the same issues but different quality of questions. And I will begin with Peter. We have just presented an impressive work on housing processes and within the contemporary context. I'm going to pose you 2 questions. One is more related with urban governance models. The other one is more related with the question of the creative processing, related, of course, with the social housing. But beginning of your presentation, the first image of our presentation, I could not help to think about to consider this, looking these central places in London, the price of the costs of a piece of land in central London, where in fact even considering these prime places that in fact even considering with other cities where the huge cities, cosmopolitan cities, and the costs of design processes of construction to follow on a line of social housing is to be seen like a principle, like a mission of your work in this case. So it's a declaration of principle to follow on this strict line to work on this social housing. And in this case, a possible mission. I would like to, regarding to your large experience in social housing for people of restricted income and very more vulnerable sections of the population, which are, in your point of view, the possible strategical models that could somehow hold or bridge the gap between the right to somehow a decent housing, the right to projects, qualified projects of architecture, the right to a qualified project of landscape architecture, and or to the machinery of developers, big developers, sometimes some enterprises involved, intermediaries involved, and the price and the system of ownership of the land. So there is a big space in between, and I think in your point of view, your experience, I think you have different systems of context. We have local authorities. The majority of your work is with local authorities. Can you begin to refer something about?
Well, I think that we are only scratching the surface, really. I think the problem is more systemic, and it requires us to have some kind of major kind of shake-up of the way that we organize our land economy. You know, we as architects have a certain amount of room for maneuver, but maybe we're not just architects, we're also citizens, and we live in democracies, and we need to try to affect change through activism, I think, and through the ballot box, and through sharing ideas, and through the media, because if the system remains as it does at the moment, we're never going to resolve these really big problems. And all we end up doing is doing these little demonstration projects so that society can give itself a sort of pat on the back and say, that was good. But, you know, that homeless project I showed you had 50 places in a city where there are 7,000 people homeless. So
it's very nice to map them and to see the relations, and the position they have in the city, yes, because it's a huge work. And this question of the kind of models of government that we get to arrive to that, and the relationship to the local communities, I think is something very central, and even the question this has to the system of the ownership of the land in this case is completely central.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Looking to your design projects, we can apprehend a very methodical research on typology, where always the open space and is think like something completely as an integrative party of the dwelling unit, of the set of units. And that is very particular of your work, both in the sense of this more private space, the intermediate space that you design, like these arcades of half yards facing the street, and these streets thinking like living streets, like a living room, in fact. What is your experience in terms of the expectations and reactions of local entities to your kind of typology of work when the dominant spatial model and urban planning rules still continue to associate the housing for social housing or low-cost housing to flats with 5-4-story house, so buildings and an extremely reduced or poor public space. I have to say that I'm also crossing with that with our own circumstances, but please correct me if that is not so your circumstance.
Well, you're asking about how people react to our projects, how residents and people in the city respond to the way that we...
In this case, I was thinking mainly about the reaction of the entities, the local entities, about your kind of architecture, which in fact, I think even, at least between us, the models of low-cost housing are in fact related with flat buildings, with 4 or 5 storied houses, and that are also supported by the rules that define this kind of models. Right. So the question is how locally they receive your proposals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the good things about the way we do our housing, from the point of view of a client, is that there is no wasted space. You know, when you do an apartment building, very often about 20% of all of the area in an apartment building is corridors and lifts and so on. Whereas if you do a row of houses, every single square meter that you're constructing is space that local entity, and by that I assume you mean our client, can rent out. Mm-hmm. It also means that there's no common circulation for them to maintain and clean. And so these peculiar old-fashioned house types have tremendous advantage, both in terms of the construction costs, because if you're building a block of flats, £1 million is spent building corridors and lifts and staircases, whereas we don't need to do that because you walk in through a front door and you're straight into your house. And also, as I say, when you're running these buildings, there is they're kind of low running costs. So from that perspective, there are also these types are ones that, although they look a bit unusual, are very familiar to people. Mm-hmm. It's row housing or it's courtyards, and although we have it's peculiar. We have in England two. There are very traditional kind of people, and there are the modernists, and in some way our work seems to appeal to both of those groups, because some people can see something of the vernacular in the work, but also I think there's a rigor in it which one might describe as modern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crossings and then the results of the way people relate with that space is beginning to see very, very good result of you are doing. I had still one question, but we have not so much time. Then I would like also to listen to our other old people that is here present. I'm sure they will have some questions. But I am going to only to very briefly outline this the moment that we are facing, that these questions that we are facing that you so well explained. So they are the basis of these efforts that are done to formulate principles of action that are related with the Green Deal, related with the new European Bauhaus of the two bases, and that indicating this unique and singular problematic moment that we are going through in the sense of all the transformations and obvious stress of the landscape, seeing like a global, in all global sense, and the delicate conditions. So, in other words, the aims of the European agreement are deeply intertwined with the need to respond to unpredictability, something that we cannot control completely, as to be, and also to the assumptions of flexibility and adaptability as a base of acting in a space. And I was listening the base of your project, because there is something very interesting in this idea of comparing results and comparing strategies between cities, between different contexts, and at the same time thinking the fact we are dealing with something that is global and is a problematic, very is heavy problematic for the moment. Is something very complex, and at the same time is very is hyper-local circumstance, because we are dealing with particular, as you also have mentioned, we are dealing with these very local circumstances, communities with specificities. Even I was looking to that cities that make part of the group. I think 2 or 3 are of the south of Europe, so we have particular things, even related with our climate, our circumstances. We talk about floods, for instance, but we have in some other moments dryness and scarcity of water, and so and also this question of the relationship established with the local authorities and their reaction. So I think that also implicates a change of ways of seeing the public space, and to maintain and continue to assure that it is alive and continue to work on and to respond to these circumstances. So my first question was, in your, it's for both, because we have basis formation, different person, was related with looking to these experiences of work, but mainly having this more broader reading of methodologies of approach and architectonic possible options. Well, how, in your opinion, these assumptions of flexibility and adaptability can be considered in the design of the public space, in all senses, of course, in global sense, ecological sense, social sense, identity questions related to the culture of local communities.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think adaptability is a key issue. Of course, when you deal with participation, that's very important, because although you work with groups of people, we are not, of course, working with everyone that is in the areas that we are, people live, study, or work there. So all the solutions need to be adapted to other uses. So we consider the proposals that groups of people bring. We take them in consideration when we design, we receive their feedback, but we always think that it's important that to think that in some period after, things may change. So in terms of program, the flexibility is very important. And what we see is that the solutions that came in most cases from the citizens, they are by themselves flexible in the sense that they try to combine things that happen in terms of culture, education, social economy. So there is always this idea that something happened today in a way, but the next moment it can be a little bit different. So this because we are not worked with crystallized institutions. So this is on the top of the table, let's say, the way things need to be adapted. On the other side, we have the working with municipalities that are not flexible structures, that are structures that are made of rules, they are made of experience that had exits, and those need to be put in practice every day, and things that went wrong in some period, they could never be repeated again. So to unblock these preconceptions that municipalities have. It's very important, otherwise we cannot test anything because there is always something that went wrong in some period. So this flexibility that you have to have not only on the process, but not only on the program, but also on the process, on the decision making, it's very important so things can happen in a different way and you can experiment things during this process.
Thank you. I actually have 2 points. The first one is that we do have a lot to learn from each other. One of the most interesting things of this European project is that we got to share the experience with other cities, and we know that we have cities that have similar problems to ours, and we have cities that are already showing us what our problems are going to be in the future. Okay, so this is to say also that we have a lot to learn from other cities, but we have a lot to learn from the past, and the work that Peter has shown in the presentation of Gonçalo already mentioned that, and they showed why it's so important that sometimes we just look back at the past and we see that most of the techniques, the solutions, they had already been in there, but we have a lot to learn from each other. I have dear friends and mentors in this room, with people with whom I actually learned a lot. So this kind of approaching, I believe that it's the present and the future, and it's something that we should all look into. The other point that I had in here has to deal with this question of flexibility, adaptability. I'm happy you didn't mention resilience, because resilience has been taken over by the politicians lately. But it's also a very important question, because the upcoming years are going to be very challenging. We actually have photos of the Esprella parks with just 2 months in difference, where in one of the photos the park is flooded with 1 meter of water, and it was designed to withstand 1 meter of water. And 2 months after, the watercourses are completely dry, and we have no historical records of the watercourses ever being dry. 2 months between these 2 photos. So we're going to face totally unpredictable challenges. We're going to have to test this adaptability, this flexibility, and one of the things that we know is that when we work together, we are much better. I'm not afraid of the future, because it's just like Alan Key, he wrote that the best way to predict the future is to create it, and I believe that this is a way of actually starting thinking about those things. Thank you.
Yeah, I have still something. I was thinking about your answers exactly. And it is really a concern of mine, the question how locally the local authorities receive these solutions of design. And I was thinking, when we are talking about flooding areas, there are some examples, European examples. I think with that reveal attitudes very drastic in this sense, but incorporate completely this idea of adaptability. And I was thinking, for instance, the Hans Stevenson Park in Korsgade in Copenhagen that is designed to be flooded. And it is thinking to different communities can use that in different levels of water, and different biodiversity systems are triggered for that circumstances. Or in the opposite reading of the thing, the position of Gilles Gleman, for instance, that is dealing with this idea of the third landscape, third nature, and he advocates not to touch at all in some areas, in central areas of public spaces that were other structures previously. They were very much disturbed, and so the intervention is completely very, very minimum intervention in very specific places, and the majority of that areas, they stay like they are, exactly in order to develop and to create opportunity that the wildlife and the biotic systems can develop. So, do you see our authorities open for this kind of attitudes in the sense of creation public space? Are they prepared for this kind of solutions? Mm-hmm.
I can just say, because this is the part that's emotional for me. They're eager for it. that's my. The thing is that all of the cities will have to sign the climate pact. All of the cities will need to have some kind of strategy. And one of the things we come to find out is that yes, there was a moment in time where these solutions were innovative and there was no maturity for some of these solutions. But what we see now is that the institutions are eager, the municipalities are eager, the European Union are eager, and now it's getting to the citizens. So most of the times you have the citizens asking for these kind of solutions. And we have a case in Porto, the Asprelas parks, that we started the design more than 10 years ago. They're quite innovative. We have sponge parks that are designed to infiltrate the water and safeguard the metro line. And they were very innovative, and now they're just spreading, and it's part of the current master plan of the city to promote more and more retention basins. But whenever we have a very interesting dialogue with the politicians, with the colleagues, with the stakeholders, because everybody is very aware of that, and everybody is very aware of that because 2 years ago people did not have enough running water on their taps, because the European Commission released a study about 5 months ago that said that 4% of the deaths in the European areas, they're caused because of extreme temperatures. And all of those deaths could be avoided. This is something that we have to be aware. We could avoid these deaths if we just make our cities cooler. Paris last month signed a commitment that they're going to depay 40% of the city because of the extreme temperatures and because of the high mortality rate. So this is coming from the politicians, from the citizens, and I would say that this is the moment, this is the time, and this is the group of people that's prepared to face these challenges.
I was still trying to, we have some question for the audience, and we have not so much time, 1-2 minutes in the maximum, but have you some questions to our guests?
Gostava de dizer que acho pena que com perguntas tão longas, muito difíceis de entender por parte da plateia, tenha ficado zero tempo para colocar questões.
Se tem alguma pergunta, temos muito gosto em ouvi-la. I was trying to know that. What is your question, please? Okay. Okay, so what they want to intervene?
I think we all have so many questions. I have only one notion. The question you refer to the street. And I thank you so much for both projects, for both beautiful pictures. Also your pictures I liked a lot, and photos. But the street you showed, I loved all of them, and I did not see a car in them. And you refer to a street. If we call a motorway a street, I'm not sure if a motorway is a street, but a kid would say a street is where cars go. Yeah. And you refer to them as a wall. So how do we bring the street as a positive thing together? I agree. I think it has so many positive, also atmospheric options. But I would like to have you both to comment on the street and or your point of view, what the street is and what it should be. Also you, Peter.
Oh, Peter, street is with you.
Okay. Well, I tried to. Well, I suppose the thing about the cars, right? I mean, in London we have a fantastic public transport system. So one's always trying to find a way to make the street a space for people to use. And, you know, in my ideal world, you know, trying to encourage, you know, those archways, trying to encourage people to take control of the edge of the street. And, you know, where we're staying near is it Sao Pedro, you know, those little streets in the fishing village. Those streets are just my idea of paradise, you know, with people with their benches on the street, sitting out in the cool of the evening, chatting to one another, sometimes wandering along to a bar, and that's what a street is to me. It's a social space. It's a place for people.
I love streets, and one of the most important things that we have to realize: a highway is not a street. Period. Is that the street is the social meets a very important social function in the city. And one of the things that we should all go back and look into, it's a work by an architect, Daniel Appleton, in the 1960s, where he measured how many people knew each other on streets according to different speeds. So one of the things that he concluded is that on the 30 kilometer per hour street, you have more friends and you meet more people, you have more acquaintances. If we just improve the speed from 30 to 50 kilometers per hour, the number of acquaintances that diminishes to 1/3. So one of the most important decisions you can make in your life is which street you're going to live in. So that's why I have a very, very keen vision on the streets. But I also have a keen vision on cars. You touched one of the things that I believe that we're all striving for, which is to take the cars out of the city. I was in London when they decided to put the toll in the city center. It was a problem by then. Nobody questions it by now. So some things we just have to do them with the people, so there is social maturity at the moment. But I do believe in a city and a city center without cars and with more people, getting to more people, and the public space, the space in front of the houses, is key for that.
Ok, muito bem. Acho que vamos então encerrar esta sessão e almoçar e voltar de novo. Muito obrigada pela vossa presença.